All right, thank you so much. I'm so glad to see all of you here today. This is something that I'm really passionate about, and so I was really thrilled when Janice and Laura Beth asked me if I would do this, because I barely even have to have any notes because I could just talk about it all day long. So you may have to drag me out of here with a hook. I love herbs, and I love cooking with herbs, and I love having them in my yard, and all my friends and neighbors know that about me, and they probably think I'm a little strange, but I'm just going to kind of give you a quick overview. I'm going to show you how I plant herbs in a little container garden. We're going to talk about a few things about cooking with herbs, and so you get kind of a little down and dirty overview of herbs in general. Just a couple things in my notes that I wanted to talk to you about. A lot of people don't know this, but there are a lot of health benefits associated with herbs. One thing that comes to mind is it can add a lot of flavor to your foods, and if you're watching your sodium intake, or you're watching how much fat in your diet, or you're trying to avoid a lot of sugar, you can use herbs to really complement the flavors of foods and then cut back on some of those things, and you still get a great taste. For example, one of the recipes that you'll hopefully have picked up is a mango smoothie, and it uses mint, and it gives it a really nice, delicious taste without a lot of extra sugar. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but that's one of the benefits of it. They're also low calorie, and they're packed with a lot of vitamins and minerals such as iron, vitamin A, C, E, B, and folate, which I didn't know until just recently. So it's a great way to enhance your food flavors. Also, if you've ever, how many people have grown herbs before, I guess I should ask? Okay, so quite a few of you. Well, if you've ever had herbs in your garden, or you know somebody that does, you know that they have a wonderful smell, and so even that is really delightful to have close by as you walk by and have that, that aroma, to have them in your home, or also to have them out there for their beauty. A lot of the herbs have flowers that grow on them, and rosemary, for example. I planted a rosemary bush in my yard a couple years ago that started out about this size, and it's now about this big. It's actually a woody shrub, and so you know, they can be really used as ornamentals in your yard, and for their beauty. A lot of them flower as well. So smell good, look pretty, and they can be used dried or fresh, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can dry them in just a second. If you dry them, they still have health benefits, although they're not quite as potent as they would be if they're fresh. Just like any food that you eat, if you eat it fresh, it's always going to be its most abundant source of vitamins and minerals. So, but in the winter, it makes it kind of hard. You know, you can buy the store-bought herbs, but it does get kind of expensive. So going with fresh in the summer and getting as much as you can, and then maybe drying some of your own is a way to go. Okay, so we talked about that. All right, so let's just, before we talk any more about herbs, let's go ahead and talk about actually planting in a container garden. One of the things I like about doing herbs in a container is that you can keep them right next to your door, and if you have a door off your kitchen, it's really nice, because even though, like, I have herbs that are way back in my yard, but to have them right outside the door makes it so easy to use them. You just open the door, take your little scissors, or even use your fingers and snip off what you want, and you've got it right there, and you're more likely to use them. So even if it's just a little pot like this by your door, that's really nice. If you have a very sunny kitchen, you could even put a pot in your kitchen, and it really needs a lot of sun, though. You have to have about 6 hours of sun for the herbs to really flourish. So you want to find a sunny spot. You could also put them on your front porch if that's convenient for you. So I'm going to show you how to make a little container herb garden today. And what I'm going to use for mine, I've got some Italian parsley here. It smells so good. We'll talk a little bit more about the specific herbs and what they're used for, but we're going to put this in here. It's a little bit taller than the others, and then we've got some rosemary. The rosemary is actually a perennial, and so normally I probably wouldn't put this in a pot. It's just one of my favorites, so since we're raffling this one off at the end, I wanted to make sure that whoever gets it gets the rosemary, because I love it, and it's also what's in your little recipe that you're eating today. But normally I would plant rosemary, since it's a perennial, more in the yard, because like I said, it gets really big and it comes back every year. So whereas your container gardens are kind of a seasonal thing. but we're planting it in there anyway just for fun. And then we've got basil, which is probably one of, if not the most popular and well-known herbs that people use. One of the things people might not know about using herbs is, or using basil in particular, and dill as well, is that it will start to flower on the top as it gets hotter in the season. And so what I find helpful is to just pinch it back. You just pinch out a little bit of it, and it'll just like if you work with flowers too, it's the same thing. You pinch it out and it'll grow more full, and it'll stop it from flowering. So that smells good. Okay, so we're gonna do a little container herb garden. These are really great if you live in an apartment too and you just have a little space and you really want to do some dabbling in herbs. So I've got my little gardening gloves. If you're new to gardening, I'm going to pretend that you don't know a whole lot and I'm going to tell you everything. These are really great gloves because they have sort of a rubbery surface over them, which is really nice. If you use just regular cloth gardening gloves, if you've ever worked with those before, they get wet really easily and they really trash your fingers. So these rubbery ones are really nice. So I've also got some really good potting soil. I would say that this is about $3.50 a bag. It's not that expensive, but it is considered one of the more high-end soils. It's Miracle-Gro Moisture Control. And what's great about this is it's actually got some fertilizer in it and some special properties that will help it to contain the moisture throughout the summer. So, you know, when you water, if you know, in the summer when it gets to be like 100 degrees out, you don't want to have to be watering it 3 times a day. So it's got something in there that holds the water in it. So as far as your pot, I normally use a terracotta pot just because it breathes better and all the water can pour out. But I got a plastic one today because it was less expensive and I was trying to be budget conscious with Vanderbilt's money, of course. And so I just got this little plastic one. The most important thing to remember is you always want to use a pot that has drainage holes. If your pot that you really want to use doesn't have drainage holes, you need to poke some in there because that's really where all the extra water is going to drain out. And otherwise, your pot it's not going to work. It's going to get rotten on the bottom. So make sure you do that. And then basically, I'm just going to pour my soil in here. And put my plants in. Another thing you want to remember when you're putting things in a container is that you really don't want it to be too full. You want to give the plants a little bit of room to grow and expand their root system. These are kind of cool if you haven't seen them. They have them at Home Depot and they have like a peat moss around them that makes it really easy to just plant it. So I'm going to put that in there and you'll see that I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's not soil all around it. I'm just going to stick them in there, and then I'm going to fill it in with the rest of the soil. And so then I've got my Italian parsley. Well, I'm doing this. I'll tell you a little bit about the almonds that you're eating. How are they? You like them? Aren't they good? They're so addicting. I was telling somebody before the presentation, I have to hide them from my husband because when I make them, he finds them. And he just will continually be going in the cupboard and eating. I think he thinks if he only eats a few at a time, it doesn't count or something. Or if he's standing, I don't know. But he loves them. And they are so easy to make. You have the recipe. Basically, all I did to make these, I made them yesterday, is I took my rosemary bush and I took my scissors and just chopped a bunch of it off, brought it in the house, washed them, patted them dry, and then took them off the woody stems. You'll see as the plant gets bigger, it's kind of woody. And took it off the woody stem, put it in my food processor, and chopped it up till it wasn't pureed but finely chopped. And you could do that by hand too if you don't have a food processor, but chop it up and then put that in a big bowl along with some olive oil. You could use another kind of oil, but I really like the olive oil. It gives it a really good flavor. Mix the almonds in there with it, and you just want a plain almond that's not smoked or salted or anything like that, just the plain roasted ones. I get the big bags. They're about this big at Costco for like $10. Take a big bag, put it in there, and then add like a coarse salt, like a kosher salt or sea salt. Mix that all together and then put it on a cookie sheet and bake it for about 25 minutes. And you bring that to a party, and let me tell you, you are going to be the hit of the party. People love them. So, and they're great with a glass of wine. They're good. So you'll have to try those with your little rosemary bush. Okay, so now we're going to do our basil. After I get these planted, I'll talk to you a little bit about how you can dry your herbs at the end of the season. Basil is great for making pesto. How many people like pesto? Yeah, just about everybody loves that. If you like pesto and you want to make your own, one thing that you need to know is you need a lot of basil. So I tend to, if I want to make pesto at the end of the season, I have to have probably 10 basil plants because it takes a lot of leaves. So just keep that in mind. All right, so all I'm doing is just filling in my dirt around like that. And you'll see how easy it is to have a little container herb garden. And this literally cost me, to do this whole thing, including the soil, was probably less than $15, I think. It was somewhere around $15, $18 at the most. And you'll have fresh herbs all summer long, so it's really nice. And we are going to give this lovely little pot to some lucky winner is going to get this one. It hasn't been watered, so when you get it home, you're going to want to make sure and water it. Another thing that's really important to know when you're doing any kind of container gardening, I have found this to be, next to the soil, to be like the best kept secret. It's probably not a secret to a lot of you that already garden, but Miracle Grow your plants maybe every 2 to 3 weeks. You know, you add water to it, and it's that blue liquid. Pour it in there. Your herbs and your plants will just go crazy. It's amazing how much healthier they are. They're more bug resistant, and they're just they'll just be very healthy, and they'll grow really big for you. So that's a really good thing to know. All right. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? Yes. Yeah, good question. There's not really any set rhyme or reason to how often you water per se. It's really more dependent on, you know, obviously the temperature and how sunny it is, if you've gotten any rain. The main thing you want to do is just keep an eye on your plants. When they're in small pots like this, they're going to dry out much faster than if they're in the ground. So you really have to keep an eye on them. For example, if you're going out of town, you need to have somebody water your plants for you that are in containers. Even if you water them really good, if it's the middle of summer, they're going to have to be watered every single day, definitely. The other thing, too, is with the fertilizer, is during that season when they are being watered every single day, every time you water them and all the water comes out the bottom, along with that water goes the nutrients that are in the soil. So that's why it's really important to keep adding that fertilizer to it to keep it nutrient-rich in the soil. So just keep an eye on your soil. You want to make sure if it starts to feel dry to the touch, when you stick your finger inside a little bit, that you go ahead and water it. Does that help? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Will those plants outgrow that and transplant?
They'll be okay for this summer. The basil, if you do a good job with it and you do everything that I suggested, it might even get this big. It'll get pretty big. The rosemary, you may want to consider moving, like I said, because it's a permanent thing, move it into somewhere where it's going to get really big. But it could stay there for the summer, and you can transplant it in the fall, which would be fine. This will probably, the parsley will probably flower and might not last all summer, but you could always add something else. You can mix things in with it, too. Like if you wanted to pull the rosemary out, you could put a flower in there, too, some kind of a real, like, flowery plant in there. Mixing herbs with your flowers is kind of neat to do. So, yeah.
Can you just keep it at a certain size if you do want it to get too big?
Yeah, that's a good question. You can trim it back to make it smaller. And that is actually something that I have done with some of mine. If I want them to be in a certain spot in my yard and I don't want them to get too big, you can just trim it back. That's a really good thing to do at the end of the season, and then you can dry your herbs. And so maybe I'll talk about that for a second. So at the end of the season, when it gets close to the time that it's probably going to frost, you know, you want to kind of harvest all your stuff. And so it's a really good time to consider drying some herbs if you want to. What you can be doing now is anytime you buy any kind of condiment like olives or pickles or something like that that come in a nice little jar, you could save some of those jars and then you've got them ready to go so that you can put your dried herbs in there when the time is right. Some are going to dry better than others. Rosemary is a great one to dry. I've done that a couple times. And all I really do is just, you can either take the whole plant or you can cut off some of the woody stems, hang it upside down and just tie a little bit of like a twisty around it and just hang it in a cool place that's not sunny, like even a garage, and just let it kind of dry out. And then you're going to just take the little pieces off the stem and put them, well, you can put them in a cookie sheet and let them make sure they're totally dried out. And then you could food process them if you want to make them smaller and more pulverized for cooking with. But then I just put them directly into the little jar like that, and they're good all winter long. I have never really dried anything like the parsley. The basil, what I tend to do with that is make pesto. Pesto is actually really easy to make. It seems like it would not be that easy, and it's not rocket science. You just kind of put everything in there and then taste it, and if it doesn't taste right, you add a little more. But basically, it's a lot of basil. So if you have one of those big food processors, you stuff all the basil leaves in there, and then you add some fresh Parmesan, some olive oil. Let's see what else goes in there. Pine nuts. Pine nuts are very expensive right now, so you could also use walnuts. I've seen that done before, and you just puree it all together, and you can freeze it in little Ziploc bags, or I've seen people freeze it in ice cube trays, and once it's frozen, you take it out and put it in a Ziploc bag. Have you done that before? Yeah, that's a great way to do it, and then you can just take one out and add it to sauces, and it's fantastic on a pizza. Pesto on a pizza is like the best. So drying herbs is a good thing to consider doing. Another one that I dry a lot is dill. That one's really delicious all winter long on fish. So let's see, what else did I want to tell you? Okay, so we talked a little bit about perennials versus annuals, and we talked about how you can dry them. Also wanted to tell you that you need to be aware that some herbs are very invasive, and I learned that the hard way. Which ones did you have that were? Yes. Mint will take over your entire garden if you're not careful. So there are a couple things that you can do. One is put it in a container so that it's obviously doesn't have anywhere to go. Another thing that you can do if you really want to have it in your yard is you can plant the container in the actual soil. And I've seen people do that so that the roots can't spread out. But otherwise, that mint has these little runners that will take off, and it will just take over your yard. Oregano is another one that I used to have it planted in my yard, and I got rid of it and moved it into a container because it just gets really invasive. So keep that in mind, that a couple of those you need to be cautious of. Let's see. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of these recipes and things, the handouts that you have. We talked a little bit about the rosemary almonds. Those are awesome, as I guess you discovered. And as the recipe card says, they're great as an unsaturated fat, so they're part of your heart-healthy diet. And of course, you know the Health Plus person always has to put in the plug for the health benefits. So, you know, they're really good. The one thing you do want to be sure and be aware of is, even though they are healthy for you, they're high in calories, of course, so you only want to eat a small amount. I think one serving is about 12 almonds, so it's not that many. But they make a great snack to throw in a gym bag or put in your desk drawer, or as I said, to have with a glass of wine on a Friday afternoon when you're getting ready to go on vacation next week, which I am. Okay, and then there's this grilled zucchini rolls recipe. This is a really good one that one of my dietetic interns came up with, and we made it for another cooking demonstration that we did recently, and it's great. She did them on a little George Foreman grill, but you could do it on any kind of grill, and basically you take the zucchini, which when it's in season is so delicious, and just thinly slice it and grill it, and then you can roll it with the cheese in the middle, and the cheese is mixed with some fresh herbs, and it is really delicious. It makes a great appetizer for a party. You can serve it hot or cold, so that's really yummy. And then you have one other recipe, the mango smoothie. The mango smoothie, just like I was saying before, is just a great example of how you can incorporate using something like mint to substitute and give flavor, so you don't have to really have a lot of sugar in it. So mint's a great one. It works really well in iced tea. If you've ever had it in any kind of iced tea or herbal tea, it's delicious. If you put the mint in the tea ahead of time and stick it back in the refrigerator, it will just infuse your tea and make it really, really good. So let's take a few minutes to look over the guide to fresh herbs that I gave you. I love this little handout. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is this gives you just some tips on what to do with your herbs when you're ready to use them. You always want to wash them before you use them, especially because, you know, if you're putting Miracle Grow and things like that on it, you want to make sure there's nothing on there. And of course, you want to get rid of any bugs or anything that might be on there. So just rinse it off with some cool water. And then what I usually do is just have like a little piece of paper towel and put that on there and just kind of pat it so that it takes the moisture off of it. And then you can chop them and add them to foods. You can saute things with them. What I also like to do is take a piece of the basil, I'll go ahead and pull off a piece, and do what's called chiffonade, which is a fancy term for something that's really not that fancy. Basically, all I'm doing is rolling it, roll it up, just like that, and then just slice it in little pieces, and it gives you these long, pretty little pieces, and you can put it on top of pizza, or after you make pasta, just sprinkle a little bit of that on top of it, and it makes it really special. So it's really nice. As the handout says, it's not really a good idea to mix two very strong herbs. The only time I ever really mix herbs together is when I make salad dressing. And this right here, whoever gets this lucky little pot, this will make a wonderful salad dressing. All I do is add a little bit of the basil and chiffonade, like I showed you, and then some of the parsley and the rosemary, and oregano's great in there too, and just finely chop it, maybe like, I don't know, a tablespoon's worth, mix it with olive oil and vinegar, and whatever else you like. If you like to, I like to add a little bit of Dijon mustard and some fresh lemon juice. Just squeeze the lemon juice in there, shake it all up, and it's like the most fresh and summery, delicious salad dressing. It's very sort of plain, but it really brings out the flavor of the salad, and you can use it as a marinade too. So this will be perfect for that. So let's talk about a couple of these different herbs. How many of you have tried cilantro? Okay, so a lot of you. So cilantro is a really common one. It looks a lot like this, and it does tend to flower as the season goes on. So it typically doesn't last all summer long. But it's a great one, and it's wonderful in guacamole. That's my favorite way to use it. As the flyer says, it's bright and citrusy, and it's great in Mexican, Indian, or Vietnamese food. Mint, we talked a little bit about that. Let's see, what are some of the other ones that are my favorites? I really like dill a lot, too. It's another one that seems to flower. How many people have had fresh dill before? That's a really good one. Put that on top of some grilled salmon, or one of my favorite things to do is actually put it in tuna fish. And make just tuna fish with some fresh dill, and just like you're making regular tuna salad, you know, if you add mayonnaise to it, or I like to add fresh lemon juice to that too, like half of a lemon, squeeze that in there with some fresh dill. Oh, it is so good. So that's another really good way to use your dill. Basil, we talked about basil. It's great on pizzas. I love to just use it for making pesto, anytime on a pasta dish. A really great thing to do that's really easy for like a quick throw together dinner after work. You're tired, you come home, you don't really feel like cooking, is to just boil some water, make some pasta, And then whatever vegetables you have, whether it's zucchini or whatever you have in the refrigerator, some mushrooms and onions, just kind of saute those in a pan, mix it with your pasta and a little bit of olive oil, and then just put some fresh basil in there and mix it in. And it really, it tastes like something special. I don't know what it is about putting herbs in your food, but it makes it taste like you're, fine dining. So that's a really good one. Oregano, I do grow oregano in my yard. Again, I said that one's kind of invasive, but it's really good on pizza, and it dries really well. Rosemary, my favorite, as I told you. That's in the nuts that you got to try. What you can also do with the rosemary that's kind of cool, and these make great gifts, is to take, especially when it starts to get bigger and you can chop off like a long stem of it, is to put it in a pretty bottle and add some olive oil or some vinegar and let it kind of sit there for a while, and it will infuse and flavor it. And you can give that as a gift to someone and give them like some rosemary infused oil. These are great gifts. Homemade gifts are my favorite ones to give. Just like the rosemary almonds, if you go to a party or something, just wrap it up in a little container and bring that, and people will think you're Martha Stewart. Okay, chives. I haven't really worked with chives that much. Has anybody else? Have you grown them before? They're pretty, aren't they? Don't they get flowers on them? Yeah. What do you do with them? Sounds good. Okay. I know they're good on potatoes. I've seen them served on potatoes before, but I haven't really worked with them that much. Let's see, what else? And thyme and tarragon. Yeah, the main ones that I really work with are cilantro, mint, parsley, dill, basil, rosemary, and oregano. The other ones I'm not as familiar with, but this gives you some suggestions on some things that you can do with them. Any other questions? Yeah.
I actually have a couple. How long will you have to leave that in like olive oil or whatever for it to become infused? And I was also wondering if there was any way to, like if you kept the container inside, to keep those plants alive just continuously.
Supposedly you can, but I've never had very good luck with that. I have tried trying to keep them alive through the fall or once it starts to get cold, because I have a really sunny kitchen. But they just never, I don't know why, they just never seem to make it. So you could try it and see. I know for other people it has worked, but for me I haven't been very successful with that. Because it would be nice to have them fresh all year long. The most likely things would be the perennials that you could keep all year long. I don't know. I think these just, because they're seasonal, they just tend to die, as their season wears out. But the rosemary probably might keep. Any other questions or comments? Yeah?
How do you keep your basil from turning dark when you're working with it, especially when you're cutting it with knives or you tear it down?
I haven't really had that happen too much, but I know mine do. I thought what you were going to say is actually getting the leaves to get those brown spots on them, because I get that a lot from overwatering. But I haven't really had that problem with. So are you using them as soon as you pick them, or are you keeping them in the fridge?
If I bring it in, maybe cut it with knives or whatever, just kind of chop it up a little bit, or put it in water, or sometimes it turn a little dark.
Yeah, there might not be. I think it's just because it's such a tender leaf that it's gonna turn a little brown on the edges, but it doesn't matter. It's still good, and it's really good sautéed with garlic, and so most of these are really good fresh or sautéed. You can go either way with them. Any other questions? Yeah.
So they'll just come back the next year or whatever after the cycle is over?
Not the annuals. Like the basil and the parsley that are in here, they won't come back. The only one that would come back would be the rosemary. Yeah, so when you're picking out your plants, you just want to be aware of which ones are annuals and which are perennials. Like the ones that I know of off the top of my head that are perennials, mint is a perennial, rosemary is a perennial. I believe, does anybody else know which ones are perennials? Thyme and marjoram, okay. Yeah, in the milder climates like where we live, stuff does tend to come back more so, but definitely like the basil, it's not going to come back. So you just have to replant it again next year.
Do you have a preference
To be honest, I'm not really that, I don't feel like I need to necessarily go to a fancy garden store. I got all of this stuff at Home Depot, but this is a perfect, I'm glad you asked that question because this is a perfect time for me to plug the farmer's market, which the Vanderbilt Farmer's Market is starting next Thursday. I'm so excited. It's actually starting about a month earlier than it did last year, and so we're going to have a lot of the early season type things. And we have some new vendors this year, and one of the new vendors is going to be some kind of a gardening place, and they're going to have all the fresh herbs, and they'll also have some plants and things, so maybe some tomato plants and things like that. Mm-hmm.
Another plug for the farmers market, the state farmers market in the Capitol Mall has a lot of gardening.
Yes.
Right now, the herbs are between $2 and $3 a pot.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and it's always such a great idea to support the local farmers whenever we can. So the only reason I got these at Home Depot is because I was kind of frazzled and I had to run really quick, but I always try to buy my stuff from the farmers whenever I can, just to support them. You can also do a lot of this from seed, too. We didn't talk about that yet, but I've done basil and some of the other ones from seed, and if you have the time and the patience to do that, that's a good way to save yourself a lot of money doing it that way. Or if you want to do a lot of it, you can start, like your basil, you could start it in ice cube trays, and once the little seedlings get big enough, then you can move them into pots if you wanted to really have a lot of basil. So.
How early in the year do you plant seeds for the germinate?
If you're going to do it in your house, you could start it as early as like March is what I would normally do. You know, because obviously you're not going to want to put it outside if you think there's a chance that it's going to get frost on it. So just have it in a sunny window and just a little bit of water, and you can really grow them from seedlings if you want to. So, any other questions?
For the ones that make it through the winter, like rosemary and parsley, how far should you cut them back to get them used up?
Yeah, good question. You can cut them back pretty far. Like, I don't know if you guys can see this. You'll see it if you come up afterwards, but there's a lot of new growth on here. So you can cut it back pretty far. Like this one's kind of getting lanky and doesn't have a lot of flowers on it through here. So if you cut it back, it'll grow more full. You could, I've done this before, is just cut it all the way back down to like here, and it'll just grow fuller through the bottom. So it's a good way to get more. Yeah. Other questions? Laura Beth.
Yes. How long did, at that lady business, how long did you say that it would take for the rosemary to infuse in the oil?
Oh yeah, I don't think we ever did answer that question, did we? There's not like a science to it, but I usually would like to keep it for about 2 weeks before it really starts to get in there and really be good. And you can keep it for a long time. You know, if you're making it for yourself, you know, just keep it in a dark, cool place like a pantry or a cupboard, and it'll keep for a long time. Yeah, it's really good to put some garlic cloves in the bottom of it. It's so good. You could put it on an old shoe and it would taste good. So, all right. So, are we going to do a drawing for this? Who's feeling lucky today? All right. Oh, I did want to mention one other thing too, y'all. How many of you have seen our cooking videos? Has anybody seen them? Okay. So we have a couple on there that have some use of herbs in them. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, we have Health Plus has a series of cooking videos that we created ourselves, starring me. And most of them are actually filmed in my kitchen, which is kind of funny. We had started filming them at the Nashville Farmers Market, and then this was right before the flood, and then the flood came, and as most of you probably know, they were devastated, and so the kitchen was not rebuilt until just recently. And so we had to move to an alternate location, and my kitchen became the location. So anyway, there are some cooking videos on there that you might want to see. One of them is grilling vegetables, and it shows me actually making a huge platter of just beautiful, colorful summer vegetables that I marinated in all different kinds of herbs, and then grilled them on my gas grill, and then just did a really pretty platter of vegetables that you could do either hot or cold for a party. And so check that out if you get a chance to. All right. Well, I guess, huh? Yeah. I've never really done that before. All I've really done is flavoring with like mint. Has anybody else done that? Make herbal tea? Lemon balm. Yeah. Lemon balm is a good one, and they actually do sell that in the farmer's market. I've seen it there before. Pardon? Thank you. That's an invasive one too, so good to know. Yeah, the containers are great. So I hope you guys learned a few things today and that you enjoyed it. I really appreciate you coming, and I can stay and talk if you want to come up and ask me any questions. And we'll see who's going to get to take this home with them and figure out how they're going to carry it back to work. Actually, you know what?